I wasn't planning to make this my next video, but I don't think I want to let this one lie, because it's a reminder of Russia's murky behaviour, or rather how we absolutely cannot trust Moscow as long as Putin is at the top. I'm going to read out the report and then comment a bit about it, because this is very, very important, not just for the personal tragedy involved, but the wider issue of disinformation. So this is from Sky News via MSN on Yahoo. Go read out the report, it's not too long, and then comment a bit. Co-founder of White Helmets found dead days after Russia claimed he was a spy. This report's by Andy Hayes of Sky News. A former British Army officer who co-founded the White Helmets volunteer force in Syria has been found dead in Istanbul. Last week, James Mesurier was accused of being a spy in a tweet from the Russian Foreign Ministry. A neighbour said his body was found on Monday near his home in central Istanbul's Beyoğlu district. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Mayday Rescue Foundation, which he co-founded in 2014, described him as a great leader and a visionary as it confirmed his death. It is believed that Mr Mesurier fell from the balcony of his home office in a suspected suicide, a security source told the Reuters news agency. His wife told police that she and her husband went to bed at about 4 AM after taking sleeping pills, the source added. Later she was apparently woken by knocking on the door, subsequently discovering him lying on the street surrounded by police. Sky News special correspondent Alex Crawford, and she's had a lot of frontline experience, she's one of the best journalists around in my opinion, said his wife had been telling friends that he had just begun taking antidepressants. Crawford added, she says she was not disturbed by any intruder and appeared to be at pains to try and quash rumours that somehow he'd been killed. On Friday, the Russian Foreign Ministry posted the White Helmets co-founder James Mesurier is a former agent of Britain's MI6 who has been spotted all over the world, including in the Balkans and the Middle East. His connections to terrorist groups were reported back during his mission in Kosovo. Crawford said that because of his connection to the White Helmets, Mr Mesurier was the focus of disinformation and hate. That was not just by social media trolls, but also by the Syrian regime and the Russian government, who see the White Helmets as a terrorist organisation, she added. Those regimes complained that the White Helmets were faking a number of airstrikes, faking civilian injuries and casualties. But Crawford said that Mr Mesurier was revered by many in Syria. He was awarded an OBE in 2016 for services to Syria Civil Defence, the White Helmets' official name, and the protection of civilians in Syria. The White Helmets have been credited with saving thousands of people in rebel-held areas during years of bombing by Syrian government and Russian forces in Syria's civil war. Their endeavours reached a huge audience through a Netflix documentary. In 2017, 7 members of the group were shot dead at their base by unidentified attackers. They were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 and have received funding from Western countries including the UK and the US. The group insists they are not partisan. The Mayday Rescue Foundation is a not-for-profit organisation with offices in Amsterdam and Istanbul. In addition to various governments, its projects have also been bankrolled by the UN. It said in a statement, it is with very heavy hearts that Mayday Rescue must confirm the death of James Mesurier. As the founder and CEO of Mayday Rescue, James dedicated his life to helping civilians respond to emergencies and conflicts and natural disasters. Nowhere was the impact of his important work felt so strongly as in Syria, where Mayday supports a network of volunteer rescue workers known as Syria Civil Defence, also known as the White Helmets. The work has saved countless lives of civilians affected by the conflict. Now, the report doesn't say how old Mr Mesurier was, but looking at the photograph, assuming it's a recent photograph, I'd say in his late 40s, early 50s. Regarding the spying allegations, the world of espionage is a very murky world, and I obviously don't have the information to say, yes, he's not a spy, you know, because he's British and I'm British. I cannot say he was never a spy. But the defamation of the White Helmets by the Russian and Assad regimes really needs to be questioned, because One of these claims that they made against the white helmets was, for example, they were manufacturing casualties of the Syrian regime airstrikes. And to justify this, they used a photo of a little girl wearing a red top, and they said that this little girl had been pulled alive in one of the airstrikes, according to the white helmets. And in another clip, she supposedly was fine. In other words, they claim that the white helmets are using actors in these airstrikes. That to me is a bit like American gun fanatics who claim that there are crisis actors every time there's a mass shooting. What actually transpired was the two little girls did look similar. They were wearing similar clothes, but they were different girls. Also, what Russian propagandists and the Assad regime use a lot is so-called independent journalists who are nothing of the sort. One prominent example of this was Eva Bartlett, who in my opinion is an absolute disgrace to the name journalism. She was held up by Russian propagandists and Assad apologists as being an independent journalist who exposes the West on Syria. The problem is she isn't independent. She's a Canadian national who has voiced support for the Assad regime. She is not an independent journalist. If she was an independent journalist, she would be independent. She wouldn't be actively supporting one warring party over another. So let's just be clear about that. Of course, with those who follow RT, it's an echo chamber. You try telling someone that Eva Bartlett is a propagandist for the Assad regime, they'll just, you know, get into vitriolic rants against you. I think it's very dangerous to hold up someone like Eva Bartlett, who, as far as I'm concerned, has been discredited as some sort of brave purveyor of truth, some sort of freelance journalist, as if she somehow has information that other frontline journalists don't have. She may be brave on a personal basis, but that doesn't mean she's telling the truth. And unfortunately, people like her are held up basically to back up Russian, Assad, Iranian propaganda. And I think the biggest tragedy of the Syria war is that, firstly, that Assad may get victory, but secondly, that for the last 8 years, unfortunately, Russian propaganda has had an effect. People do believe the narrative that, oh, it's just an embattled leader trying to save his country from terrorists. I've always said that, of course, there are terrorist factions operating in Syria. Of course, there was vicious Islamist groups like ISIS and others. But those organisations capitalised on the conflict as time went on. They were not in the Syrian conflict in a big way in 2010, 2011. They really started to capitalise and really gain foothold in 2014-15, and that was after Russia and China vetoed any condemnation of Assad's brutal use of force against civilians, which has been abundantly and independently verified. Anyone who is genuinely going to argue with a straight face that the Assad regime hasn't targeted civilians, they're lying through their teeth, or they're just plain ignorant. I've been following this conflict very closely from the start, and it's very clear that this is another example of a brutal dictator who used brute force to put down legitimate protests. Those protests in 2010 weren't to try and install some sort of Islamist caliphate. They were legitimate protests about fuel prices, about unemployment, about human rights abuses. That's a fact. Unfortunately, because of the power of Russian state media and Russian fake news, a lot of people do believe in this narrative that Assad and Putin are the good guys. And what I find deeply concerning is you get Westerners, some of them in a position of significant authority, for example presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, who actually endorses propaganda. And I find that absolutely, to be quite honest, I find it sickening. I got a lot of heat on my channel when I pointed this out, when I criticised Tulsi Gabbard for her position, but none of my critics had any credible evidence. All they had was rants against myself. They never actually produced any evidence that wasn't sourced from either Russia Today or Press TV to contradict my claims. I know Syrians, and the fact of the matter is they hate both Assad and those terrorist groups. I mean, the thing with Syria is it's kind of taken a backseat to other conflicts like Afghanistan this year and Yemen, but it's still raging on. And at this point, who knows how it's going to end? Probably Assad has the upper hand. But getting back to this case, it's absolutely grotesque that Russia is now smearing this man, a man who dedicated his life to helping other people. I think we should be demanding evidence from Moscow that he is in fact a spy, was a spy, because you're basically smearing a dead man. I wouldn't put it past Russia to have engaged in underhand tactics. I mean, Salisbury, remember, was only last year, but even if Russia wasn't involved in Mr Mesurier's death, you know, the fact he committed suicide may be because of the harassment he was receiving from Russian trolls. Clearly this man wasn't a pushover, you know, he's a former army man, he's clearly not, he's clearly a brave man, but, you know, anyone can snap, and it's just a very sad situation. Until Russia can prove that he was a spy, or until they can prove that the White Helmets are actively supporting terrorist groups, I've seen no hard evidence for that, then it's just disinformation and it's a smear. And it sickens me that there are Westerners, and I may as well raise this since it was brought up on my previous video regarding Tulsi Gabbard. I had a guy who claimed he was a Vietnam War veteran. He may or may not be. He claimed he was 73 years old, he was a Vietnam War veteran, and he got into the, you know, patronising sort of young man, you don't know what you're talking about sort of language, and he claimed he'd done a lot of research, but the sort of research, it was quite a lengthy response he made, was entirely from Russian sources. It was entirely from pro-Assad sources. I don't care what your background is, if you're going to support a dictator who has rained chemical weapons, barrel bombs on civilians, I don't care what your background is, you've got no moral credibility in my opinion. Okay? I don't care who you are, I don't care what job you do, if you're going to back Assad, you have no moral argument. Simple as that. And it disgusts me that there are a lot of people out there willing to do that. So, I don't know what sort of outcome this is going to have, particularly with the location being Istanbul. We definitely, in my opinion, can't trust the Erdogan regime 100% either. So it's just a sad situation. But I think it's grotesque that the White Helmets have been smeared and slandered. I have seen no hard evidence whatsoever that they have any links to ISIS or other terrorist organisations. This is an organisation that has saved thousands of lives from airstrikes, who have risked their own lives to do that. And it disgusts me how much they have been vilified by the likes of RT and Press TV. If you think, by the way, that RT is innocent and they're just showing another point of view, I mean, I personally think there's no getting through to people who blindly believe RT, but for those who are kind of on the fence, just look at the way they do reports. All their reports are kind of sarcastic critique of Western foreign policy, and they'll have titles like "Watching the Hawks," as if Russia is a pacifist country. It's a joke. It's a bad joke. I detest RT, and I do not see why we are allowing this thuggish Kremlin mouthpiece to operate in this country. I think we should absolutely take away their license. I think Ofcom needs to get some backbone and do that. Of course there will be reprisals against the BBC and so on, so be it. We should not be giving a platform to RT in this country, because the Russian state under Putin is hostile to this country. And more importantly, well, just as importantly, they're spreading fake news. They're trying to smear the White Helmets, they're smearing this man, and they're propping up the brutal Assad dictatorship. It's sickening. It's an insult to the thousands upon thousands of men, women and children murdered, maimed and tortured by this evil regime. It's absolutely sickening.